I don't know what's going on with the state of Rhode Island, because it used to be when you drove down here, all the beach traffic was coming north. But I think what happened is everyone who lives in Providence has moved to South County, and now it's all heading south. And so it took me about 6 hours to get here. Just exaggerating, don't worry about it. I want to try a bunch of new poems today. I'm going to test drive some poems, as they say, although I think the poems drive the poet and not the other way around. Some of these are new, some are moldy oldies sprinkled throughout. And this one it's a bit old, but I've never read it in public before. My wife is French-Canadian, and every few years we go up to visit the Rellies up in Quebec. And one time we went up to visit, and we visited our Uncle Philippe, who at the time, well, he's deceased now. I think he's still deceased. He was 96 years old. So I want to start off with this one. It's called A Visit with Uncle Philippe. We sit at court on folding chairs, watch him scratch his balls through his bathrobe, long past all small discretions or the itch of little words. He's haloed in thin light this night, not sick, just 96. Thinks he's earned the right to whine at will in phlegmy French, says English gives him heartburn, and his Adam's apple's plainly lost for good inside that frayed sleeve of a voice. There were 12 in my family, he tells the gray granddaughter, hovering with applesauce and spoon. Now there is merely me, merely me, merely me. He sighs a deeply Gallic sigh and looks around disgustedly. Why can't I die? My life has been an opera, a great novel. He twists his scrawny vulture neck, squints and sniffs the hospital smell, asks, will hell be as magnificent as this? I do appreciate being listened to because we all know this. It's just a basic fact of human nature. Nobody really listens to anybody. When you're having a conversation with someone, you're actually thinking about what you're going to say next. You're not listening to what they're saying, and the same goes for the other party too. So once in a while, when someone actually does listen, you can sense it, which is what this one is about. It's called She Listened. She listened to me like I was the Grand Canyon into which she had just tossed a pea, like I was a giant cloud and she was thirsty brown earth. She leaned over and looked at me like God had just appeared on her iPhone. She listened like she was reading my lips with her own. She listened to me like a customs officer, suspecting I had lied about my luggage, like I was a coyote who had just chewed off its own foot to escape the sprung trap she had baited with perfection just by listening. This is a kind of a poem that I wrote off of William Carlos Williams' world-famous poem, The Red Wheelbarrow, which if you haven't heard of it, well, here it is. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. That poem was written in 1923, and it has confounded generation after generation of college students ever since. It's been the prime reason why so many college students say they hate poetry. Because they just don't get it. This poem has nothing to do with that whatsoever, except I used that first line, so much depends upon, that key line, and then just kind of notched in what came after that. So much depends upon the blonde woman who drops a potato in the supermarket parking lot, where it rolls beneath the '89 Dodge Ram with rust patches near the left rear fender from contact with too much road salt during the winter of '91, which was actually one of the mildest on record, though the driver tends to remember it as the season he was fired from his job at the aluminum window factory, where he had worked for nearly 16 years without promotion, as he shifts into reverse and backs over the potato, which squishes as softly as a dream's last breath, and leaves slick asphalt for the lot boy to slip on as he pushes a train of shopping carts and sprains his lumbar vertebrae just days before he is scheduled to leave for basic training to become the cool, killing machine he's always craved, but will now have to settle for someday making assistant produce manager and marrying a girl he almost loves, just as the blonde woman finds herself one potato short with dinner guests ringing the doorbell. All eventuality, nothing happens in a vacuum. I stuck this poem in here at the last minute because it's very important to me. This is a poem about my favorite food, and this is just the perfect time and place for my favorite food, which I am embarrassed to admit is fried clams. I'm embarrassed to admit it because they are so bad for you on so many different levels. First of all, they live on the bottom where they absorb all the polluted stuff going through. And then when you eat them, they're going to rot your guts and they're going to harden your arteries and ruin your bowels. It's just horrible. But they taste so good. And so I started this one with an epigram. That's just a little italicized piece of business at the top of the poem to kind of put it in a context. And this one is from the poet David Joss. And the epigram is, what is a life but millions of moments like this? Fried clams. Their symmetry of crisp irregularity, their soft back taste of the beginning of the world, the low tide hidden underneath the brown gold sun of each one sweet oiled coat. While I waited, I stared out the window near my booth, watched the tips of marsh rushes tossing in the offshore air, and when I looked back, there was a mountain mounded on my plate. The clams intertangled like lovers on a bed of fries. They tasted like surf pounding rocks for 50,000 years. They tasted like a flower unfolding at night and only once a season. They tasted like spangles of salt and death and the wind rising up from the floor of the ocean. And of course, I tasted them again about an hour after. And all that night dreamed whatever clams dream in their beds on the bottom, not knowing if they're awake or asleep, like us, not knowing the difference. Guys, you should have made fried clams a state appetizer. I'm a bicyclist by hobby, and as I age, I find I'm doing it more and more. And one of my favorite places to bike up in Providence is, of course, Swan Point Cemetery. And just the idea of having this sort of robust physical activity among the dead was the spark that generated whatever this is. It's called Swan Point Cemetery. No finer place to bike on a spectacular fall day like this. The rows of polished headstones glow, set off against the red-flamed maples. Even the rough granite ones seem to smile back at the sun. Now I am pedaling past the Armanos, Dennis and Joan. Too bad they are so asleep in such excellent weather, especially Joan. And over here on my left, beneath the well-tended lawn, is Louis Gibbs, side by each with his life's love, Eleanor, who predeceased him by a single year. Wish they could see past their coffin lids and up through the soil at this painting of perfect towers of cumulus, drifting off to where it all apparently starts over. Looking around, I don't see anyone's eyes glazing over. So boldly I will continue. I want to save plenty of room for our open mic. This is just a short little poem. I wanted to write a poem about a kite that sounded like it was a kite, and it's called Kite. Too light for land, a place in space, where cloth is braced with twine and splints to make a shape that smells like wind and tries to touch the thin day moon, then dies inside a sky of trees, to be forever brushed by winter, amulet of branches, flag of every broken thing. Now for something completely different. I wanted to come up with a title that would definitely attract everyone's attention instantly. And I thought about it and thought about it, labored over it, and finally came up with the perfect title, and here it is. Sex. They say it was popular in the 60s. And all you had to do was walk up to a stranger on the sidewalk and tell them they were beautiful, and presto, there you both were, under a bright yellow forsythia bush, with a fresh breeze shimmering the leaves, and the earth rolling on deeper through the blackness, and peace, and drugs, and rock, and love, and roll, and a joint being passed somewhere, and not caring if you had a class, or a job, or even a ride home, and every person in the world coming at once, and the happy sky. I don't know, do people still do that? This is a weird line of poems, I'll tell you. This is another brand new one. My wife and I travel a lot. We go overseas, and we see, I don't know if the best phrase this would be politically correct. We see Islamic people in France and Spain and places like that, and they're far more extreme than any Islamic people that I've ever seen in the States, particularly the women, who wear a kind of burqa that's just, it must be unbelievable to be in there. They can only look straight ahead because they're behind this sort of mesh screen, and furthermore, everyone can see what they're looking at because they have to turn their full heads in order to see it. That got me going, and this is for all of those women. It's just called burqas. Can actually be slimming. Hide your flaws. The broken teeth from chewing rocks. Your husband's gifts of welts and bruises. The saggy flesh from Purda's prison. You glimpse the world straight down the center from behind that thick mesh screen. It's useless to see the left or right of things. Useless to understand the why of obedience. Somewhere deep inside the night, the moon is hanging by its wire. A puppet, an unsmiling god, bobs and dangles like a sliver of hope. Like the shiver when you overhear Al Jazeera in the next room, teasing you with news reports your husband calls lies. When I was the poet laureate, it doesn't come with any job description. You kind of have to make it up as you go along. And I was sort of futzing around looking for something to do with my time as laureate, and I realized that we do not have a state poem. Of course, now we have a state appetizer. We also have a state drink, vodka, of course. Spargo. What else do we have? We have a state bird, which is a chicken. Okay. But we don't have a state poem. I looked online to see what other states have, and I found out, for example, that Alaska has a state fossil, the woolly mammoth. Ohio has a state rock song. Ooh, Hang On Sloopy by the McCoys. A Mistake on the Lake. Yes. But Rhode Island does not have a state poem. So one day I was roaming around, driving around the western part of our state in my car. And when I give readings out of state, a lot of times I have to stop there because people don't realize that Rhode Island has a western part. They think that it's so small, it must just all be one thing. But we all know that we do. We have Foster and Gloucester and Exeter. So I was out in Foster or Chepachet, somewhere in there, just driving along, minding my own business, and I saw this sign by the side of the road that said, Jerymouth Hill, 812 feet, highest point in Rhode Island. I didn't even know I was going uphill. I was just driving I thought, we're not only the smallest state, probably the shortest state as well. But then I started to think, I looked around and there wasn't anything there, just some scraggly trees and stuff. But I thought, every place has a history. Whether or not it's on the surface, it's still there. America is very old, long before it was called America. People have lived in the area around Chepachet for some 12,000 years. We only tend to think about our history going back to 1770s, but actually it goes way, way back. So I did a little internet research, found out everything I could about Jerymouth Hill, and I wrote this to be our state poem. It was sponsored by a state senator, and it passed both houses unanimously. And the state senator called me up and said, we're going to have a signing ceremony in the governor's office on Tuesday. Will you be there? Yeah. Next morning, I woke up after having not slept a wink all night, picked up the morning paper and read Governor Kachiri vetoes state poem. Such is life.
Where is he now?
Well, I was about to say that. I'm still a poet. He's not a governor anymore. Anyway, now Senator Linda Finn of Portsmouth has picked it up and promised to push it through during the next session.
Nice.
Stay tuned. Jerimuth Hill, 812 feet, highest point in Rhode Island. You will not recognize any bald knob of granite or sheer cliff face silhouetted against clouds. In fact, you won't realize you're anywhere at all, except by this bullet-riddled sign by the road that curves through these scraggled third-growth woods that was once a grove of giant pines that were cut down for masts, that were used to build ships to sail away to the rest of the world from the docks of Providence Harbor, their holds filled with wool from the sheep that grazed in the field that had once been the giant pines, till the shepherds died off and the applers took over and grew orchards of Cortlands and Macintosh delicious to fill the holds of the ships that sailed to the rest of the world from the docks of Providence Harbor with masts made from the giant pines, till the orchards moved west along with everything else to less glacial land, and the fields became overgrowth of berries and hobblebush, crisscrossed by walls made of stones that had slept beneath 1 inch of topsoil for 12,000 years, till the settlers found, when they tried to plant crops, that this was a country that grew only rocks, which they made into walls to pen in the sheep that provided the wool that filled the holds of the ships that sailed to the rest of the world from the docks of Providence Harbor. Last summer, I went to, took a great trip. We went to Spain, we lived in Barcelona, spent a couple of days there, rented a car, drove up the Pyrenees to the peak of the Pyrenees to the tiny little country of Andorra, which isn't really a country at all, it's just a big shopping center. And then down the other side into France, where we rented a house in a little village called Mirepoix. And then from there we went back into Spain, visited Salvador Dali's hometown. It was a fabulous trip. One of the most memorable parts of it was I got to go explore a cave where there are cave paintings. And it's not generally open to the public, but we got permission to go and see this little town called Nayo up in the Pyrenees. And I was just so impressed with what I saw in there that I had to write this poem about it, just to kind of explore it. It's called Nayo Cave Paintings. Half a kilometer deep in the ledge, the limestone slippery, the ceiling dripping tears the mountain holds inside. We are far up in the Pyrenees, the French slope, stumbling through blackness thick with meaning, each with a shaky flashlight. When the shaman made these drawings, no one had yet tamed a horse or notched an arrow in a bowstring. Bison roamed the grasslands below, and humans had only pointed sticks and thousands of questions. It's important that there are no people drawn, as if the ibex and the buffalo were worshipped as horned gods, impossible to approach. It's important that whoever sketched these lines, shaded precisely with breath and muscle, was touched with such amazing talent, even when there was no word for it. Good drawer. He has, I don't know, what would you call it? Speaking of language and words, I read recently that the Eskimos have 300 words for snow. And based on that amazing fact, I tried my hand at writing this. It's called 300 words for snow. Eskimos resent being Eskimos, prefer Aleut or Inuit. We can only imagine the disgust they must feel when one of the 300 words is misspelled. They live in huts of pressed tin, resembling the igloos they no longer sculpt. Their words for the melting world involve none of the words for snow. do not rub noses in love, eat raw blubber, or leave elders to freeze outside when they are no longer able to remember all 300 varieties or even their own names. They watch the remaining polar bears, watch for remaining seals. Watch the seals, watch for bears, as the sky darkens and rain falls across the tundra, leaving them speechless, for which they have no word. From that climate change deniers, I can't imagine that the Aleuts or the Inuits deny climate change at this point, or people who live in Miami, for that matter, where half the city's knee-deep in water half the time. I'm going to finish up with this one and then leave plenty of space for our open mic. I want to thank you all for listening to me. I really do appreciate it. I often come across, I guess through my work and also through my abrasive personality, as being kind of curmudgeonly, but underneath it all, I am a grateful person. My favorite holiday is Thanksgiving. And so I wanted to write a poem to express my gratitude. This is called Be Thanking. Sometimes I am being like all thanking and thanking, like when I am in a field or looking at one. And sometimes I am looking at the fields of sea and like thanking and thanking you for what is under everything but darkness. And when the goat skin is being emptied and I am inside my stomach swimming in the red wine, I am also being like all thanking and thanking you, who hides behind the blue sky, behind my aching. And then I am to lick my paw and be thanking and thanking, because nothing tastes as good or as bad. And thank you.